group, also running the network called the Kondo Community Network. So the scenario as we speak right now, in as far as, sorry, I just realized that the recording has just come on. Let me do the introduction again so that for those who have just come in after the recording. Hi, Sabelo Sibanda is my name. I'm an advocate in Cape Town, South Africa. I am the founder of the School of African Awareness and chairman of the Pan-Africanist International Advocacy Group, and also chairman of Ukondo Community Network. We're looking at the situation as regards human rights in South Africa. The scenario right now as regards human rights in South Africa, such that like many countries in the world, the country is under lockdown. We've just moved from what was termed level 5, we're now on level 4, whereby the restrictions are supposed to have been lessened somewhat, and some services which were not deemed essential under the initial lockdown, which was level 5, are now being opened up and people being able to access that particular space. And even when it comes to the items that people are allowed to buy, the fact that we are now approaching winter, the shops that sell winter-related clothing are now allowed to sell that sort of stuff. So you find that the situation as regards human rights in South Africa is primarily regulated by the Constitution under the Bill of Rights, which gives basic civil, political, and socioeconomic rights. But under the current scenario with COVID-19, the situation is that the Constitution of South Africa, under Section 36 of the Constitution, does allow in an emergency for government to derogate from some of the constitutional rights, basically meaning that some of the rights can be suspended and people can officially be denied some rights. For example, freedom of association, whereby people can meet whether for religious purposes or it's an association or an organization that needs to meet, or it's a community structure that needs to meet, that has been restricted. And definitely freedom of movement as well, that has been restricted under the current conditions as we speak. But then, having said that, there is a scenario that is playing itself out, which we are still grappling with and trying to understand as to where exactly it's taking us in as far as these rights are concerned. Here in Cape Town, when the lockdown started, we had a situation where the city of Cape Town erected basically a camp and rounded up as many homeless people as they could find and put them in this camp. And some people were challenging the legality of having this camp set up and basing on the various aspects of constitutionality and that kind of thing. Now we have a scenario where the camp has been closed and the people have been trapped and dumped in town, which in itself is also a violation of their human rights. And you see, in as much as a lot of people are in support of the lockdown on the basis that it's for the safety of the nation, the derogation clause, the limitation clause that I spoke about earlier, Section 36, is very clear and specific on that. The reasons for basically activating Section 36 must be reasonable and justifiable. So the question that arises from a human rights perspective is whether these lockdowns are reasonable and justifiable under the circumstances. And when you look at the question of reasonableness and justifiability, the further question that arises is what informs reasonable, what informs justifiable, because there is nothing in the Constitution that can really give basic direction and interpretation as to what entails justifiable and what entails
reasonable.
reasonable.
Yeah. Can I just put a pin in that? Sorry,
that
Sabella. Can I put a pin there? When you said reasonable and justifiable, you see the homeless people you was talking about, where the government put all the homeless people in one place after knowing the disease that's around, that is not justifiable and it's not reasonable. Because if they're trying to keep social distance, then, you know, putting all those homeless people underneath one roof like that, it becomes unhealthy.
No,
So
that is the whole point. Yeah, that is the whole point with the aspects of reasonable and justifiable stick to different levels under the circumstances, in the sense that on one hand, besides the fact that the rest of the world immediately went into lockdown and came up with all sorts of rules and regulations, except a few countries, we need to understand the basic justification in as far as the science behind the reasoning. We need to understand the medical aspect behind the reasoning. And you are very correct that we have to understand that these homeless people, by being locked up in this camp, amongst the arguments that was raised was this aspect that you are speaking to now, the social distancing, and the fact that for a lot of these homeless people, a lot of them are compromised in as far as their immune system is concerned, because you find that by virtue of the fact that they are not getting proper nutritious food, their immune systems get compromised, and a lot of them end up on drugs, and a lot of them end up basically numbing their senses using alcohol and all these other things. So now you find that when this blanket position is taken, there was no effort on the part of government to basically determine whether this thing can be applied across the board, or there are certain classes of people who need to be given some special attention and therefore be given a way by which their rights could be protected. Because now the chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission even flagged an issue just last week and said, look, we need to pay attention to the fact that this issue of human rights becomes very, very difficult where you are dealing with a society which is rife with inequalities. And South Africa is definitely one of the most unequal societies in the world. And there is
sorry, Sabella, let me put a pin there 1 minute. Please, everybody, I've been asked by Antonio to put your phones on silent. If you're not speaking, put your phones or laptop on silent, please, because I can hear feedback. Right? Go ahead, sorry.
Sure. Yeah, so what I'm saying is basically that the scenario as we speak right now is such that the broad violation of rights is such that there was no effort to look at people's different realities and experiences. For instance, you've got literally in every metro in this country, shacks upon shacks and upon shacks. I don't know how many millions of people live in shacks, where you find that in some scenarios there is a whole family living in one shack. And this shack could, if it's big, it could be something like 3 meters by 3 meters or something like that. And you've got family of 4, maybe a family of 6 or something living in that sort of space. How do you then attend to issues of social distancing? And let me give you a practical example of Kaelicha right now, where there are shacks, where you have a good 50 or so families sharing one tap, where you have 20 or so families sharing one toilet. How do you then impose lockdown in a situation like that? How are you protecting these people in a situation like that? Yes, government did say they'll make sure that there is water everywhere, but we haven't seen it and we are not seeing it. And I'm not sure at what time and at what point the government will respond in as far as that particular aspect is concerned. Because one of the biggest mistakes with our application of human rights is that the human rights regime, particularly in Africa, did not pay attention to what President Senghor said in 1979 when he said that when the development of the human rights instruments across the continent are being looked into, there must be particular emphasis on African cultural values. There must be particular emphasis on identifying African realities and ensuring that these instruments will speak to the realities of our Africanness. But we are caught in a scenario where a lot of our countries, our constitutions, when it comes to the aspect that now speaks to what I will basically encompass under the Bill of Rights, basically copy and paste. They take whatever Europe has done and we want to impose it upon our reality, and it does not necessarily address the reality of who we are as African people. And
That's
you see,
true. That's very true.
When we look at it from that perspective, you find that the West, in conceptualizing human rights, looked mainly from a perspective of individual rights, whereas we as African people come from a basic notion and understanding that I am because we are because I am. If I don't have the collective, then I am incomplete. I'm incomplete. And if the collective doesn't have me, the collective is also incomplete. So we need to basically be in a position whereby we address our human rights culture from a perspective that speaks to our Africanness. We need to begin to understand that the legal framework within the continent of Africa does not start with colonialism. Colonialism brought a foreign legal framework, which we all adopted as our so-called independences. We did not go to a position where we say, we are African, and by being African, let's revisit the way that we have always done our things. The concept of law is not new to Africa. When you look at the days of Kemet, the laws of Ma'at give us the framework that basically we should be founding ourselves on in as far as who we are as African people and the evolution and development of our framework. So that I don't take up all the time and give other people an opportunity to speak, let me just correlate the African Charter and the South African Constitution, as indeed I know it also speaks to constitutions of other countries as well.
Yes.
I spoke earlier about Section 36, the limitation clause in the Constitution. And as we speak right now, we have the African Charter, which charter was adopted as far back as 1989. 1981, sorry. And then we found that it came into force in 1986. By 2016, 54 of our countries had basically signed onto the African Charter. The African Charter does not have provision for derogation of rights. The African Charter, you find that even in some of the cases that have come up before the Commission, has been found to be the correct legal position, which basically means these countries that are not subscribing to that aspect of the Charter are in violation of the Charter. So then it comes back to a question of, if the Charter is about the African people's rights and the constitutions are in violation of the Charter, where exactly are we going and what exactly are we saying? That is something that we are working through.
That is something that's quite interesting that needs to be discussed. Maybe after the question and answer session. Yeah,
definitely. It's something that we need to give attention to, and it's one of the things that is the advocacy group we are looking into, to say to what extent our African countries really in keeping with the African Charter and the matters and judgments that have come through the African Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sabelo, for that wonderful and powerful insight in human rights. So we're going to come back after anybody who wants to ask any question, the question and answer session. So we have a lawyer from India, and Jared, please introduce yourself and unmute your mic.
Please.
Can you hear me?
Hey, please.
Can you hear me, please? Hello? I think he can't hear me. Can you unmute your mic? Your mic is on mute. Just a minute, I think.
Caroline, try and unmute him from your side.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, can you? Yeah, he's on now.
Hello.
Hi, can you introduce yourself and the people know who you are from India? Welcome, welcome.
Yes. Yeah. First of all, good evening, everyone. Each and everyone participated in this meeting. So myself, I am Jayaram Siddi from India, and I am practicing advocate. I am African descendant in India. I belong to Siddi community. Siddi community are called African descendant in India. I practice law in Bangalore city. It is a South India, Karnataka place called. I mainly deals with the immigration matters, criminal matters, and human rights issues. And in my community, I'm the first African origin lawyer in India. I deals with the matter related to property dispute, all other matters for the community. And apart from that, I help African students and African citizens who were foreigners in India, for them with respect to immigration matters and passport matters, all those matters. I am assisting them as their counsel. And there, with the human rights aspects, I am working with the community as well as African community as well as Indian community. This is what my background. And so far as human rights issues are concerned, for African people in India, is the biggest problem at the moment. And presently there is a COVID-19 situation here. It is day by day, it is increasing, and it is very bad. And some of the people already they are in the prison. So their human rights is going to be violated. And for silly cases also, they were in prison. So because of the lockdown and emergency, they cannot come out from the prison, and they cannot move from this country also. And they are suffering from lot of problems. For example, some of them, they are not getting proper financial assistance, and they are not having proper places to stay, especially like countries like Ugandan citizens and Rwanda and the Sudanese. Many Africans are here. They are facing a lot of problems, and we are fighting for their issues actually, and we are fighting for them to send back to their countries, and through government. But still, because of this lockdown, everything is stuck down. Many Africans in the prison. That's what we are feeling bad. On one side, issues regarding the Africans in India, and apart from that, so far as my community is concerned, from where I have come from, that is regarding their exploitation in India, because our population is very less. We are in only 50,000 population across the country, and they are not educated. They stay in the forest, and where their human rights is going to be violated. Their property, what they have cultivated, that was been taken by the people who are well educated, and we have the caste system here. The upper caste people, like money-minded people, can say, they have already taken their properties and are fighting for retake their property. But that is all the judiciary and all political controlled by the upper caste people in India. So that is the reason they are suffering. And moreover, apart from these property issues, our people are motivated to commit some criminal offenses, and they force them to, they will pay them little amount, and motivating them to commit some criminal offenses. Thereafter, they are putting them in the prison, and we are in very small in number, so we cannot fight all the time, because the political pressures and some other pressures is going to be create problems for us, because our population is very less. So that is the reason we need to be organized, and with the population is very less, and is divided in different states, only in South India, and we are not united yet, and we need to be united to get all the people surrounding South India. So we are not having proper communication, nothing. We need to be improve our cultural wise. We need to improve our politically, all the sectors. And being a first lawyer from the community, I have to take responsibility, and that is the reason we have formed the Global Law Forum. It's namely Global Law Forum. We are the founder of Global Law Forum, and this focus is that to assist the Africans in India, and also conduct the charity work for the community and assist them. With this platform, we are working from last 10 years. I'm working as a lawyer in Bangalore and handled many issues. Number of foreigners we have supported with respect to their immigration and other, where the human rights violated, and we help them. And even for the community also, we are putting our effort best. But if I'm grateful to be a participant of this meeting today, and I hope I can get international support if it is any complicated. Then so that is being in a team, legal team, it's a good opportunity for me also to highlight the work what I'm doing. So this is what I can say at the moment, shortly, for the what is the present situation in India. Thank you for providing me opportunity, and if any questions, I can be answerable.
Fantastic. I mean, that was so insightful. There's a lot going on in India. I mean, it seems like there's similar issues that are across the board, even here in the UK, that we all relate into.
Okay.
In terms of what's going on currently. And to me, it seems like there's a lot of people's human rights that have been violated. Like, for example, what Sabelo said, what is boundaries? What is the social distancing? How do we know whether what is reasonable and what is unreasonable, you see. I mean, Bumi, are you there?
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Hello, Bumi.
Hi.
Hi. Would you like to expand on, you know, what's going on in terms of the British human rights area and how you see the situation, like in terms of human rights?
Well, with COVID-19, I think the main human rights we have in the UK is the bill. Well, I know people are talking about their rights as per the lockdown. But for me personally, I mean, obviously I'm not talking on a personal level, but I think the lockdown is mainly for our own good. But as far as the bill, which I think a lot of people are protesting against, in the fact that it is not, I mean, people's opinions and views are not taken into account before the bill was actually, because the bill has been enacted in the UK. It was on the 27th of April. And I know a lot of people are not happy about that because obviously previously law, it's violated. Obviously, one of the things is, as far as this bill is concerned, after the lockdown, for instance, if they think you have the symptoms of coronavirus, you can be forced to go into hospital. Everybody that has any contact with you can be forced to go into hospital as well for a checkup. So what people are saying, basically, the human right is, I have a right, this is my health. If I like, I go into hospital. If I don't want to go, so be it, as long as I quarantine myself. But obviously, the government are going, I know this is going to go around all over the world anyway, because it started off from Germany and it's come to us and it's gone to a few other countries, even in Africa. So it seems that the main human right, as far as we are concerned in the UK, is the right to our own personal opinions, our views are not taken into consideration. I know in Africa that it's a bit worse, and in Asia with the issue of human rights. But as far as UK is concerned, even though most of our opinions and views are not taken into consideration, but they do take our opinions and views into consideration sometimes. For instance, I know a lot of people complained the other day about, we don't know what the government are doing. It is our right to know. And what is the Prime Minister doing on Sunday? He's going to be giving us a roadmap into what is going on. Even though, obviously, you and I know that this roadmap is not going to be the full shebang of what they are going to be doing.
Yeah, they're going to be telling us bits and pieces, right? Because we know there's different phases coming now.
Yes. So, obviously, but at least they're going to give us a roadmap. As far as I'm concerned, the meaning of this roadmap is we are going to give you bullet points. It's not going to be in details. But at least you ask for it and you get it. That's the way I see the human rights in the UK. Because with our human rights, it's a lot subtle than African countries or Asian countries. It goes on, obviously, we have a right to our human rights, but sometimes it's not up by the government, but in a very subtle way. So that's the difference between ours in the developed countries, so-called developed countries, and developing countries. And for now, except if anybody has a question, especially in relation to the coronavirus bill, I'll try my best to answer the questions.
Yeah, so that you know, we've covered the human right. Now let's go to what's happening to Black people in China. As we know now how human rights go. So
someone asked the name of the law.
I'll pose that question to Sabelo. What do you think is happening to the Black people in China, and how do we go forward in terms of supporting them?
Excuse me, Caroline. Someone asked for the name of the law that Bumi was talking about.
Bumi, I think you can answer that question.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, how are you?
Hello, I'll just
Hello?
write it on. I'll just write it on the board for everyone.
Okay, then. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, can I make a
Hello?
comment? My name is Caroline. Can people
Yes,
hear me?
please, yes.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
I'm a solicitor advocate, but I deal with criminal law. So this isn't, human rights is not my area, but I am aware that the Coronavirus Act, which I think 2020, which I think the lady before me had referred to, actually came into force on the 25th of March 2020. I'm aware that there are videos going around at the moment, and people are referring to laws that came in on the 27th of April, but that's not quite accurate. What is accurate is that they would have checked the update on the legislative material online and would have seen that it was updated as at the 27th of April, but it wasn't enacted on that date. And I think we also should look at the Public Health Control of Diseases Act 1984. There are some interesting sections in there, and I'm myself looking at the terminology that's referred to in there, because we're already bound by that in the UK. And I believe it's 45, section 45E, I haven't got it up at the moment, but it refers to the discretion. It says may not include the use of administration of medical treatment, and their definition of medical treatment includes vaccine. But when I see the words may not, it to me suggests that they may in other circumstances. So one has to be mindful of the wording. And even sort of across when we hear speeches about the coronavirus, etc., and the government making reference to what's happening, be careful of the words. And sometimes it's a lot about what they don't say rather than what they actually do.
I agree with that, yes.
And then the final point I want to say about legislation is that we could be debating this one all night long, but by tomorrow, they could enforce emergency powers and circumvent everything that's already in existence anyway. And that's where our difficulty is. How do we deal with it when they decide, well, actually, we're going to improve upon that? Because whilst we have the Coronavirus Act in, and it's kind of semi-slipped in, you know, some people know some things about it, some people don't. It's not really been discussed over the media. But like I say, come tomorrow, they could say, well, the situation has changed, and we're now going to implement X, Y, Z as a matter of emergency powers. So, you know, we have to be mindful of that as well. So whilst we're working with what we've got now until a so-called vaccine comes out, but what's the situation going to be when there are developments in this case? So eyes open really and keep alert. So
that is an awesome input. So may I ask you a question? Is it a criminal offense for them to take you unlawfully to get that vaccine?
Well, I'm looking into it at the moment. One, they don't have a vaccine, so that can't be done. The terminology, it says that they may not. So if a person was taken against their will at the moment, any advocate, no doubt, will be coming to court. And if they wanted to advocate on behalf of that individual, they would rely on that statute and say, well, the law actually says may not, because there are some advocates at the moment, and there is a lady, Louise Hooper. If people look online for her article, she's from Garden Court Chambers, I believe. And she did her own analysis of the current legislation. And in her opinion, she felt that may not meant that, no, they're not able to. And on that basis, one would be able to make a challenge in relation to anybody being taken against their will. But like I say, in the English language and the interpretation of legislation so far, I can envisage that if this becomes an issue, then what will be said is that if government wanted it to be a must not, they would have said must not. They chose may not for a reason, to leave it open. So that's where I think we are at the moment.
It's quite, I mean, it's quite intense, because then it seems like there's a lot of, how can I say, there's a lot of unsurety going on, even within the government themselves.
Absolutely. And I think it may well be intentionally vague in that way until such time, you know. So if you keep things vague, you're able to play it whichever way when you want to play it, so to speak. So it may be strategic just to keep it vague for those reasons.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is it everybody, and this goes to everybody on here, and those advocates in UK, I know you're an advocate, you can put your contact details if people want to communicate and contact you and use your services in the messaging, so that we all know we're here to, you know, educate ourselves as ethnic minority of people of color, and also as a think tank. So we would like everybody that has any form of services to offer to put their information in the messaging so that everybody can have an opportunity to get that. Thank you so much, Jeffrey Claxon, for sharing that. I mean, right now we see how Black people in China are being mistreated, and I will ask some of you advocates, what would you, especially Sabelo, how would you suggest that us over here can support these people?
The situation regarding China, it's a very sensitive situation, and it's complicated by the fact that China does not really have a known reputation in as far as the protection of human rights concerned. And China is one of those countries that basically is not subject to the Rome Statute. But having said that, the approach that some of us have taken through the Pan-Africanist International Advocacy Group is to basically look at how we can begin to lobby the African Union particularly to address the situation from a perspective of the diplomatic relations which exist between the member states of the Union with the Chinese, with the view in mind that as individuals, there is little or nothing that can be done, but we can assist our brothers and sisters who are in China by pressuring our governments to take a stand. And even for you in the United Kingdom and other parts of the world, you can basically take the same approach by pushing your governments to take a position on this particular aspect, and at the same time to also lobby the African embassies that are in your countries to begin to revisit the position as regards the diplomatic relations that the mother country has with China. And definitely, the situation right now, our biggest compromise is the inability to gather. Otherwise, the process of basically protesting outside their embassies would be one approach, but that is not possible under the circumstances. And I like what I'm beginning to see happening in different parts of Africa, that Africa is beginning to take a stand and criminalizing anything and everything that the Chinese citizens in Africa are doing, which is in violation of the law. You know, there's always been this complaint about the proliferation of Chinese nationals without documentation. Suddenly they're in the country, they've got jobs, and when they come in for a particular contract maybe, and they bring their own people to do the work, whereas there are African people who can do that sort of work. And we basically on the continent seem to labor under this impression that we have an obligation to protect them. But when our people are in China, the Chinese government does not seem to see the necessity to reciprocate that obligation. And of course, with us, that is part of who we are as African people. And the whole concept of Ubuntu, which is our humaneness and human dignity, entails that when a stranger is in our midst, we treat them well. But that is now being used against us. Our culture has now become a weapon that is used against us, and that should not be the case. We should be in a situation where our culture is used to protect our interests and protect our Africanness, And it's time now that we should also be putting pressure on African governments to begin to revisit the terms agreements that are being entered into with the Chinese. Because a lot of these agreements that are being entered into are detrimental to the interests of the state, where basically the state does not exclude the citizens. If there is an agreement which basically has as part of the conditions that the land can be taken away, that the minerals can be taken away, then that in itself is unconstitutional. That in itself is treasonous, because it's selling off the national assets of that particular country. And these are the kind of things that we need to come to a stage where we go beyond talking about and actually implementing mechanisms by which to advance our interests as African people, by which to protect our interests as African people. So it's absolutely necessary that we begin to form strategic alliances with our brothers and sisters who are in China. We begin to put pressure on our governments, if it comes to it, to begin to question our diplomatic relations with governments that are pushing an agenda which is contrary to the interests of African people. And we need to understand that in as much as, yes, we're talking about China now, the situation is not basically confined to the Chinese experience. Anyone and everyone seems to believe they have a right to do whatever they want with us as African people. Look at North Africa now. We lost North Africa. It's centuries now that North Africa has been lost to the Arabs, and no one is talking about it. As we speak right now, we have our people who are still being enslaved by the Arabs, and we're not talking about it. So we find that more and more we need to begin to structure a network whereby, over and above the national legislation, we need to begin to look at some of these international instruments that protect us as African people. We need to begin to look at these international instruments that speak to our realities. My brother Jayaram was talking right now about the experiences in India. It's absolutely mind-boggling to think that the Siddis have been in India for centuries now, but he is the first African lawyer. But their community has been there for centuries. The community has actually even given India accolades in as far as the sporting sector is concerned. But once they're done with them, they get rid of them, just hide them. No one knows about them anymore. No one cares about them anymore. We see the brother who was just shot and killed in the United States. The man is going for a jog and he is killed. And these people are excused on the basis that they say they thought it was a burglar. We have seen it here, our people being killed. And the next thing, the argument is we thought it was a monkey. And we see in Greater Manchester right now, the man who was tasered. And this is happening to us all over. And so we need to begin to come up with a scenario where we understand that as a global African nation, our reality is the same, and we cannot continue anymore to view our realities as though we have separate existences and therefore have separate outcomes in as far as the way in which the world is dealing with us as African people. We have an obligation to ourselves, we have an obligation to our future, we have an obligation to our children and their children's children. And so now, yes, let's definitely zero in on what is happening in China. Let's get to understand also from our brothers and sisters in China, if there are any who are in the legal fraternity, and we see how we can begin to even support their initiatives as lawyers in that country. If there are none within the legal fraternity, then we get those who understand the laws to be able to share with us some of these realities, and we advise in however which way we are able to advise, limited as that advice will be, but it is very important. And one of the most important things that we can do is to continue to show solidarity to our people. We need to find ways and means which will go beyond Facebook and WhatsApp and actually show that we are working with them and we are working in a manner that is speaking to the powers that be. For as long as we are speaking amongst ourselves and complaining amongst ourselves and analyzing situations amongst ourselves, we are not achieving anything. So let's go to the powers that be and begin to get them to be accountable. As African people, we have an African Union that has indicated that it is including what it said was the 6th region, and the 6th region is the diaspora. And what concerns me is that much of the time when they talk about the 6th region, they look at the United States and look at the Caribbean, leave out the United UK and the United Kingdom, leave out Europe, leave out the Africans who are in Asia and in Australia and all these other places. They just tend to look to one part of the world. So we need to begin to realize that the time for talk is over, and it is important. I will say this to you, especially who are in the diaspora. Guys, look, if there is anything that we have to learn and understand out of what is happening right now.
100% agree. I mean, what you're saying is absolutely right. We need to be more action-oriented.
You guys must realize that there is a home, and we need to develop our home, and this home is Africa. And what is happening right now is that the racial profiling of African people is happening on a much bigger scale. And we need to begin to develop our homeland, and we need to begin to realize that we are responsible for whether Africa gets sold or gets protected.
That is absolutely right. I mean, we can't, as you said, it's more of an action plan that we need to be implementing and strategizing. I mean, we've started now that all 33 of us that are on here, we can do so much together and then really implement. So our next speaker is Esther, and she's going to be talking about the legal repair. How can we repair it and reparation? Esther, are you ready?
Hi, greetings everybody.
Greetings.
Yes, I'm not sure if you can, I don't know why I blurred. Camera's awful.
It's all right, you go ahead.
Okay, all right. So listening to everybody's contributions, the diverse contributions that have been made, what it makes me think about, just to say that I'm a reparationist, which is a reparations scholar activist, jurisconsult, which is a specialist in jurisprudence, the philosophy of law, not in terms of just like statute law or what they call black letter law, but the actual philosophical underpinnings of justice systems. And within conventional sort of European legal thought, there is this notion of kind of like law and then equity, and it's like they're two separate things. And I'm thinking back to some of the points that Brother Sabelo mentioned about the fact that we as African people have not done enough at the state level in terms of, you know, our internal governance systems to develop our own law. And for me, that's the starting point in terms of the contribution that I feel that I can make. Because a lot of what has been shared talks about our disempowerment and how law is used not only as a tool of that disempowerment, how we as an oppressed people, not to say that we don't have ones and ones amongst us who might feel they're doing okay, but if we look at the condition of our people globally, we can see that irrespective of how great you may think you are, somebody somewhere is going to define you or do or implement a power system that is a global system against you. And so that means that it has special considerations for those of us who are lawyers and who are concerned with how the law operates in our lives. And as for myself, I think that what's important is that we need a new law. We need to repair the notion of the law itself and what we consider law to be. And in our struggle as African people, we have to recognize that law, someone else's law, was used as the tool to dispossess us and empower us. And that is still done today. So we cannot just come to law as though law is not political, law is not about power, law is not about special interest groups in society who collectively organize to wield that power and benefit members of their group. So unless we deal with the African national question, which is what Brother Sabelo has alluded to, we're going to keep seeing more and more of these legal unmet needs. Okay, we're going to have more deaths in custody, we're going to have more dispossessions, we're going to have more inequality in the workplace and every kind of, you know, aspect of our human lives and people-to-people activity. So it means that we have a justice imperative of actually looking at how do we now create, shape and utilize and make law in a way that can defend our group interests. Because if we are not recognized as a group, if we say, okay, as African people, as a group, if we do not have, if there is not a recognition of an international legal personality for us as Africans, what it means is that in all these different jurisdictions and territories where we currently reside, we're always going to be the ones who are at the losing end. And so we have to organize, and I think a big part of the work that I do is kind of moving away from individual case law to recognize that the problem is systemic and that what we actually need is systemic change. And that might seem like big picture stuff for many people, but if we combine the different works that we're all engaged in, we can see that actually we are a people, we are a nation, we do have power, but we need to organize and mobilize that power in a way that actually works for us so that we can enforce our group rights and in particular our rights to self-determination. So self-determination in the healthcare field. Sovereignty is the big one, because actually if you are a people who have been dispossessed of your sovereignty, it means then that we, most of us, especially diaspora communities, we are living in societies where all we can do is appeal, if you like, for greater recognition of our civil rights. And it has to go beyond the civil rights framework. We know our leaders in the 60s told us that it had to be a human rights struggle. And in terms of the African contribution, we have always spoken about not only the rights of human beings, but also of the collectives, which is people's rights. And so what is the kind of law that we need to be practicing and developing and shaping to address our people's status globally? So just as a so-called Jew, in terms of the state of Israel and the recognition of who is a Jew, you know, coming from the maternal line, that is a global, if you like, international legal personality that can get exercised anywhere in the world. And you have the various formulations, whether it's the Jewish Board of Deputies or what have you, that ensure that the rights of so-called Jewish people are protected and defended. And what we as Africans lack is something of that power and weight. And I'm not advocating that as a model, I'm just using it as a descriptor in terms of the situation in our group rights. So the struggle that I'm particularly involved in is the struggle for holistic reparatory justice, which some of us in the various campaigning structures that I'm part of refer to as planet repairs. And the reason why we talk about planet repairs is that we're in a moment of global upheaval because of this pandemic, so-called, that is categorized as COVID-19. But we know we've had, and there was reference to it earlier on in the call, before that there's been Ebola, you know, there's been HIV, AIDS, different forms of what some would argue are bio-warfare, genetic warfare, biological warfare that are disproportionately affecting us as Africans, and some would go further to say are particularly targeted at us as Africans as a way of the continuation of genocide and also ecocide in terms of the destruction of our habitat, our homelands, the natural environment that sustains us, the pollution of our water bodies that actually we rely on for food. So that is what we're seeing globally. And the work that I'm involved in is how it's not possible. There's different ways of framing the liberations possessed, their lands, their resources, their lands. That's the situation that we are in. Argue COVID-19, deaths in custody. I'm informed with really what law is enacted. Combine our efforts to organize, to go beyond what we're doing now, are concerned with. And we know that it's not even just country borders, it is international. And that is the people. And we know that in the struggle chart, what's referred to as an legal struggle for reparatory justice, of the most important instruments in our African struggle for reparations, is the need to locate our claim to restitution and everything else for the damages caused by the gross violations of our African sovereignty must raise immediately for us the essential question of whose framework, whose law, and whose justice. And that is what I guess I just, in terms of.
Wow. I mean, no more to add to that. Reparation is reparation. I mean, unity without the meeting of the mind is not unity. So indirectly what you're saying, as Africans, we have to have the meeting of the mind as a whole. But how do we get to that level? It's just, I don't know. I'm going to be reading some comments here. Antonio said exactly, the West do not want Africans alive. They want our land and our minerals wealth. We need to rise up against the tannery and authorization actions. Big up, fearful evidence appearing real. That was from Jeff Claxton there. So right now we are going to open the floor for some questions. If you've got a question for any of the speakers, please raise your hand, and then we will answer the question. Is there any questions in the room? Hello? Hello? Okay, whoever's got any questions to ask, please put up your hand. Or Antonio, do you have any question? You can just come straight up and speak.
All right, okay, hi. If the lady that just spoke, forgive me, I've forgotten her name, I have heard of her before. Esther, beg your pardon, yeah. Need to come together as a collective in order to unite, but as there's so many disparate voices, how are we actually, how is that tangible? How can we actually get together? What is stopping us getting together? How can we overcome that impasse so that we do get together? Is there a specific organization that we all need to join, or any other methodology you can think of?
I think that question is for Esther.
Okay, so my thinking is that I don't believe I said we all have to come together in that way before this can happen. I know that there are different coming togethers at different levels, and the reality is some of this work is being done at levels where our people are not necessarily there ordinarily, because the movement continues, whether people recognize there's one, whether they're part of it, whether they connect to it or not. The struggle continues. And so that work is being done. What I think needs to happen is there needs to be more linkages between the different people and